Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome again to my audiovisual channel. I am Gabriela Handal, a draftsman and the host of the show, A Conversation About Art, during which I look for the meaning of art and beauty through conversations with colleagues in different artistic fields. Today, I bring you episode 21, and I will have this conversation with Brian Booth Craig, a sculptor. Brian, thank you very much for talking to me today. Please tell our viewers and listeners who you are and what you do.
You're welcome, Gabriela. Thank you for having me on. So, as you said, I'm a contemporary sculptor, but to be more specific, I'm a contemporary representational sculptor, mostly working with the human form,
Mhm.
and most of my pieces are cast in bronze. I show at a gallery in New York City, Louis K. Mizell Gallery in Soho. For 10 years, almost 11 years, I was a professor of fine arts in Connecticut, and I also teach workshops around the world, and I have a small farm here in Pennsylvania with a big
Farm.
with a big studio.
Uh huh.
Yeah, and a big studio where I do all of my sculpting work when I'm not traveling, teaching, and doing other things.
Okay.
That's the brief version of who I am.
That's the pith of it.
Yeah,
Okay, well
yeah.
that's good. Okay, so tell me about these specifications of contemporary and representational. What does that mean?
Right. That's great. I use the word representational purposefully.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason I use that word is because rather than say figurative or realistic. I particularly don't like the word realism in relationship to what I do, because I think in a certain sense, all art it represents something, whether it represents a visual experience or a feeling, whatever it might be. So it's somewhat of an all-encompassing term to use, which I understand might confuse some people. But what it means is that I'm observationally representing what I, the subject that I'm working with, which is mostly the human form. So you could say figurative, but of course that kind of boxes me in a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily uh, stick to just doing the figure. At least that's not my intention to only do the human form. But that's primarily what I do. So and contemporary, that's a much more difficult one
Mm-hmm.
to define, partly because I think it comes weighted with a lot of baggage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean it. The way I use that term is very straightforward and specific, meaning that I try to make work that is in conversation with the work of my peers. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So by peers, do you mean fellow sculptors or fellow living artists or
I
both?
think fellow living artists, yeah, not necessarily sculptors, but living just whoever is doing creative work at this time, this period of human history. I want my work obviously to be in conversation with those people because I look at their work and I'm influenced by their work, and they are following the narrative of what it means to be human in this world today, and that's why I think these terms need to be applied somewhat broadly because I think of art as a much broader thing than simply the kind of work that I do. And I look at a lot of things, and so I strive to at least make artwork, make sculpture that that can converse with the various things that people are exploring in the world that we live in, creatively, that is. So yeah, I think it's obviously the contemporary art has different meanings to different people, but I like the straightforward one
Mm.
that I just gave. I think it's more embracing the larger scope of human endeavor, creative human endeavor.
Yeah, I like that straightforwardness as well. I personally also don't care for the cult leader speak art talk
Right.
um, of certain things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
postmodernism and the like.
Yeah. I mean, they tend to be. I mean, now all of those terms have a function. They have a purpose. They
Mm-hmm.
exist. They exist because categorization helps us to place things, right,
Sure.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
understand where they exist within this broad spectrum of human creativity, as I said. But they also can be limiting and can quickly become passé. So I I think terminology, we both went to grad school and we were very steeped in the language of contemporary art that is employed by various publications and so forth. But but sometimes that's just obfuscation
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily enlightening for the viewer. Uh, so as you know, like whenever we're taught to write an artist statement that somebody can visualize what you do by what you explain. Of course, that's almost impossible to do.
Mm, yeah.
How would you define a Beethoven symphony, right? Like in an artist statement, you can't really do it. It's somewhat indefinable in that regard. So and part of it also is my attitude about art in general, which is I have a very ecumenical point of view on art making, meaning that I don't think I try not to separate too much of high and low, or fine art versus pop art, or I think human creativity is so expansive that the efforts to narrow it down too much, I think, are somewhat counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to leave myself open to all of experience. In fact, when I go to galleries, I intentionally will often seek out things that I don't understand, that like
Mm-hmm.
maybe confuse me a little bit, but that's good. I think that's the way it should be.
Sure.
Don't
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think in fact, I tend to not look as much at the artwork that is similar vein as mine. I tend to look more at things that are somewhat outside of my particular my particular path. But anyway, that's all to say that whatever terms we use to define ourselves, of course, are going to have hearers that define those terms differently. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
yeah.
Yeah, no, the part about going to galleries and deliberately looking at things that you don't understand or you're not familiar with makes a lot of sense in terms of populating the image bank of
Hmm.
information that further enriches your knowledge of art and just
Hmm.
informs probably your work as well, like the way that you were saying of the contemporary part that you were saying about how your work like talks to your contemporary peers of living
Right.
artists. So that really makes a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense in the way that we exercise our brain when we're trying to learn about something we don't understand, or when you're trying to learn something new. That's really good. It's like exercise for your brain, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
true.
that's really,
It's
yeah,
true.
that's a really smart thing.
And I also think that people have a tendency, this is just a human tendency, to dismiss things they don't understand,
Yeah.
or to dismiss things that they think they understand, but what's really happening is presumptive. Um, and I say that partly because of my own experience being a representational sculptor. I'm obviously fitting within a very long and clearly defined lineage,
Mm.
right? So that begins with the ancient Greeks, right? So that lineage, of course, tempers the way people view what I do, and so I try to apply the open-endedness to other people's work in the way that I would want that to be applied to me.
Mm.
Right. So because I think, like I said, there are two tendencies in dismissal. One is dismissing because you don't know anything about it, or one, you dismiss it because you think you know what it is,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And you're presuming. Uh, and I think as representational artists, this is a particular problem that we have. We
Yeah.
tend to fit into the latter category of people presumptively looking at it and saying, okay, well,
Thinking
I
they
know it.
understand.
I know
Yeah.
it. Yeah, exactly. I know what that is, because I've seen antecedents of that particular form of art making or line of inquiry. But of course, that's partly why I like it, because the challenge is to try to take something and flip it over a little bit, turn it
Make
on
it
its head.
refreshed. Refresh
Yep.
it.
Yep, exactly. And it's hard to do. And I don't think I'm always successful at doing so, but it's just that's the journey. That's the path. Uh,
Yeah, that's the search. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk more about your sculpture. I would like to know why, or both why and how. How did you end up sculpting? And if you tried other things, because you draw occasionally,
Sure.
and you do other. I don't know if you maybe do other artistic expressions, but why did you end
Mm.
up sticking with sculpture?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was initially in undergraduate school and entered the fine art department, I was sort of open-ended about it. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. So I did some painting, I took a bunch of classes, right?
Mm.
Across the various fields. And then I took a sculpture class and I just fell in love. I just felt natural. I fell in love with the materiality of it. And I think that's what has made me stick with it because in fact, I was just talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, or maybe it was even yesterday. I'm a kind of person that I tend to get bored, kind of not quickly, but I need to be challenged to keep my
Mm.
interest in something,
Mm.
and so one of the things about sculpture is that it's such a time consuming and labor intensive process. There's so many materials and processes that you to learn how to use and employ in the medium, and it's so that I think it's that constant challenge that keeps me engaged, and uh, and so I think that's probably what got me addicted to that process of just okay, I learned how to do this thing, now I have to learn.
Can you hear me okay? Are you still here? Brian? You went out for a bit there. I don't know if you can still hear me. But your image is frozen and I cannot hear you. I'm gonna chat.
Yep.
Okay, you're back. You're back there now. I did not hear
Okay.
part of that. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay, you're gone again. You're going in and out. Or
Here. Yep. Shoot. It's really bad.
yeah,
Hmm.
I just chatted at you because you were
Yep.
frozen there for a good amount of time. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Hold
Okay.
on.
Okay, so
So should we go back to what I was saying? Can you edit that? Is that okay?
um I can try. I've yet to learn video editing. But
Oh
I mean
no.
it's not I'm not super worried about it or anything. It's not a big deal.
Okay. Okay.
I just missed what you were saying.
Okay. So let's go back to I'll just go back to my answer, and
Mm,
then maybe you can figure out a way to cut it there,
sure.
just in case. So I would say that part of the reason why sculpture was so appealing to me and continues to be so appealing is because the possibilities and for making sculpture are seemingly endless. In a certain sense, any material or object could be used within the sculptural form,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Um, and so, in fact, when I first started in the sculpture department, when in undergraduate school, all of my work was non-representational. Uh,
Uh huh.
it was all much more, maybe a little more formalist, or not so much conceptual, but very formalist and processed. It was very much process based, processed art. So I was really influenced by people like Martin Purrier,
Mm-hmm.
Anish Kapoor, in my in their early, that was just like many years ago, earlier iterations. And so that was the kind of work I was really looking at when I first started
Uh huh.
in the fine art department.
What's formalist?
Formalism, yeah, again, there's another one of those words, right?
Yeah.
That's, I mean, the way I'm sure that there are multiple ways to approach defining this, but I would say formalism is and as a matter of fact, representational work could be formalist as well. It's
Mm.
it's it's something wherein the form itself is the idea, and so that the conceptual or this conceptual framework and subject for it is not buried within the form but is the form itself.
Mm-hmm.
um, so for example, uh, so like in other words, there's no there where there's nothing there, it's not a symbol to represent something else, that the form itself is the representation. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So, for example, um, uh, a figure that is somewhat decorative would be formalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in other words, its function is simply to act on its environment and the space in a physical way, but doesn't necessarily have a symbolic uh, connecting point to some other idea. So that's the kind of work I was doing before I started doing representational work,
Mm-hmm.
before I started working with models and sculpting from life and that sort of thing. That's really what I was interested in. But more so, even more so than it being somewhat formalist, I was really interested in process art, meaning that you the engagement with a material and the residue of the action by the artist in the making of it, the process of it,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea, right? And so whether it's, like I did a bunch of pieces in undergraduate school where it was like gluing blocks of wood together and then chopping into it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, abstract, not, well, non-representational, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so those are the kinds of things I was doing, or I did some welded pieces, things like that,
Okay, so
fabrication, that sort
so
of
then
thing.
how did you end up with the figure?
Yeah, good question. Um, I had a figure drawing class in undergraduate school. It was actually the only figure class in the entire school.
Mm.
It was a figure drawing class. The department there was really no representational work being done by professors or students, uh, as far as I remember, actually. But I took a figure drawing class, and I was kind of good at it right away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just had because I'd been drawing my whole life, so it wasn't drawing wasn't a new experience for me. But I just kind of was good at it really quickly. And then I thought, I'd like to try sculpting the figure.
Mm.
And one of the professors let me do an independent study. And in that independent study, I started doing representational things. So yeah, it kind of fell into my lap in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt natural. It felt very uh, like organic to me. And here's the other thing, the I then it's always hard to think back on what happened, that many years, and
Mm-hmm.
what influenced you, why you start doing something. I'm sure there are lots of gaps in my memory about how that path occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing also was that an artist that I like fell in love with when I was undergraduate school, and he was just starting to become big, was Antony Gormley.
Mm-hmm.
Back when he was doing this is when he was doing the life cast pieces, and with, covered in lead or cast and he did some pieces like cast in carbon steel, Corten steel, and so his work. And then I also saw Robert Graham's work in an Art News, an issue of Art News or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two, like my seeing those two artists made me realize, oh yeah, there are actually possibilities in representation that I haven't explored.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even think about. I wasn't aware of it that much because it wasn't talked about when I was in graduate school. Although I will say, I mean, I know a lot of people who are representational artists who say that they had a very negative experience in their undergraduate programs if they were they're trying to do representational work. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I actually was. My professors were all, they didn't discourage it at all.
Oh, good.
They, yeah, they. Now I was on my own. I had to teach myself,
Mm.
but they could see that I was trying to figure out a way to do it in a different way. But of
Mm.
course, the problem with the kind of work that I do is it takes so long to just get good at at seeing and
Ah, you're cut off again.
I think we paused again.
Ah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, we
You're
paused
back.
again.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Just
sorry.
very short amount of time. No worries.
Yeah. So one of the difficulties trying to is being a contemporary representational artist, particularly if you want to make work that has a mimetic resonance to it, that process of learning is extremely time consuming.
Mm.
So that, and I see this happen to some people who want to do representational sculpture. They spend so much time just getting good at the depiction of human form in the act of observation,
Mm.
that they the conceptual framework lags behind,
Mm.
right? And so I think that for me, it took a long time for those two like things to intersect, right? They were heading toward intersecting, but it took a long time
Mm.
because I nobody was teaching me how to sculpt human form, so I was just teaching myself, and that process took a while. And then of course now I think I have all that under my belt, so
Mm.
I can start to branch out and conceptually, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really good about the how in undergrad your teachers and your peers in general. It seems like they were supportive because it's like you're right. I feel like the reputation that like conceptual quote unquote art schools have
Yeah,
is that, and I mean, something like that happen like in the '80s or something when people like Eric Fischl wanted to do the
yeah,
figure.
yeah,
And they were like, "Oh, what the hell are you doing? That's
yeah,
like, that's dumb," or I don't know, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so like that sounds like a great environment. And like, I do wonder, it's like, why weren't they like? It's cool that they were supportive, at least like like egging
Hmm.
you on and stuff. But
Hmm.
if nobody was teaching you, I feel like that's almost, I mean, it's lacking in overall skill in the sense of, I don't know. I think an artist should be able to
Hmm.
at least talk about or understand or be able to paint themselves, the figure, and just, I don't know, a little bit of everything in a way.
Perhaps, perhaps.
Um,
One another way to look at it maybe is, I get what you're getting at, but I also wonder if perhaps one of the problems is not so much that we should expect, um, our educators to be conversant in all of those things, but that our institutions would understand the broad spectrum of what human beings have created,
mm,
and find ways to help people discover what those things are so that they can find their niche. I mean, really, that's kind of what school is for.
mm,
It's to help people understand who they are
yeah,
and how they fit into this enormous arena of possibilities.
yeah,
And um, so I mean, I sometimes wonder, like when I hear people talk about having like an experience where they wanted to do a kind of work in school, and they had pushback, like negative. I sometimes wonder like what they were like too,
mm,
because one I think I and now obviously I think my professors and colleagues were good people that I was there with, but I also think some of that might have been simply because I was like gung ho to try anything, right?
uh-huh.
Like I was just kind of like I was like, "Ah, you want me to make, you want me to do a performance little thing? Okay, whatever, I'll try it."
Mm-hmm,
Like
yeah, yeah,
I didn't, I was curious about everything,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was in school, I was in undergraduate school for 6 years because
Uh-huh.
I just kept like taking classes like
Mm-hmm,
over
mm-hmm.
and over. I kept putting off the idea of graduating
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I was like, I just loved school so much. I just,
yeah. School's
I would be
great
like,
for
oh,
sure.
I would be like, it's like, oh, Russian literature. Okay, I got to take that
Yeah,
class,
yeah, yeah.
whatever it was. I couldn't, like, yeah, I just loved that experience. So I think that's part that might have helped me, was that I was really open in that way, and didn't I didn't push back against the idea that there's something you can learn from everything, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, at the same time, and I guess conversely, it's also really great that you were able to find your way
mm,
by yourself, because that, I mean, that's kind of also what school and life in general is about. Really, to
mm, mm,
look for your way, find your way, and just
mm,
find a path and stick to it, or then find another. Like that search,
sure,
which, by the way, is it has come up several times in previous episodes as an important aspect of art as a search, like you're looking for something.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And actually, I mean, as your experience in undergrad, it sounds really quite nice and just really fulfilling in that sense of that you were looking for something and you found something important.
Right.
Okay, so all right, time is time is flying by. Okay, so I want to ask you. I want to ask you other stuff, but I okay. So, Mr. Boothcraig, what is
Yeah.
art in your
Oh
opinion?
boy, that's the
We
toughest
got we
question
got
of
there. Yeah.
all. Yeah, that's the toughest question of all. Uh, yeah, I, I think it's so hard to define, partly because our own the human definition of it has changed so much over history, right?
Mm.
So um, I read a really good book recently called The Mind in the Cave, about the
Mm-hmm.
origins of about the origins of art, in particular the depictions in cave art, and or just
The
early
mind
depiction.
in the cave.
Mind in the
Yeah.
Cave, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, it's a really good book. Um, Probably from about 15, 18 years ago, somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
And and so much of the theory in that book has to do with the that human beings were they would have these like ectopic experiences, where you're in that state of consciousness where you're not unconscious, but you're not conscious, totally 100% conscious. Like, there are actually multiple states of consciousness.
Right.
There's not a single state,
Mm-hmm.
or two. There's not a binary state. There's actually multiple stages of consciousness, and there's that point at which your experience of consciousness, like when you're first falling asleep and everything, you're kind of awake, but everything's a little bit like you're in another realm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the theories about in other words, his idea is that the reason it's called the mind in the cave is like, this is the cave,
Mm-hmm.
and those they were expressing that sort of change of consciousness. Some of it was, of course, done with substances, the change of consciousness.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
but so the reason I went off on that seemingly unrelated tangent to your question
Uh-huh.
is that I do think that understanding those origins of the
Sorry
human
about that.
creativity. It's okay. Um, Happens all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying. I'm pretty sure it's spam. Go ahead. Sorry.
Of course, it almost always is. uh, uh, I think understanding that will help us understand why we still do it, right?
Yeah.
That that it obviously art serves a function of expressing the mores of your culture sometimes, or expresses the narrative of a particular society, right, in its public work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an expression of that, sort of an expression, a communal expression of that. But I think ultimately it's really an expression of the human search to find meaning
Uh-huh.
in existence, and give shape to get. And so creating, it's a way of creating meaning through shaping your world. And um, so that's why it's also a sort of ever expanding field that builds upon itself, because the ways the human experience is changing, and at the same time the human the possibilities um, for making things changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately it's sort of rooted in that existential human crisis that we all experience, that my dog doesn't experience. She's just happy, she lives, she's like, she doesn't sit down and question what's the meaning of all this. She's
Is that the crisis you're referring to? It's like, what is the
Yeah.
purpose? What is the meaning?
What is the meaning? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think that's it's our the dawn of human consciousness is closely related to the beginnings of art making,
Mm-hmm.
where people start to be able to reflect on we're a species that can reflect on its experiences and project from those experiences into the future some sort of meaning
Mm-hmm.
for why we're here. But of course, there isn't an answer, right? At least we don't have an answer yet. We don't. I don't think. I think we're collectively like searching for that thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the further you go into it, the more you realize the more questions there are to answer.
Yep, yep,
Right?
yep, yep.
And that's why the what you said earlier about the search, I think, is so important. It's not an end point. It's not. There is no sense of finality to being an artist. At least I don't feel that way. And
Mm-hmm.
I reserve the right to completely change what I'm doing at any
Sure,
given.
yeah.
I mean, you could talk to me in 10 years, and then hopefully I will be doing something really different. But the point of that is that the reason it changes, and sometimes that change is slow, um, and sometimes that search it takes time to make that to follow that arc, the narrative arc of your own line of inquiry. But ultimately it's that search that matters. So that's what I think art is. I think and that's also why, because when it's so interesting how our culture, well, I mean, particularly contemporary culture in the West, is a very pragmatistic culture, right? We consider arts like as an unnecessary thing,
Mm,
right? Which I think is completely wrong.
yep.
In fact, I think it's necessary, but
Mm,
it's necessary for our mental and spiritual and emotional health,
mm.
not just as individuals, but as a
As
species.
a group, that, yeah.
As a species, yeah,
As a
exactly.
species,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and not as a culture or a society or a family or an individual, but as a species.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We clearly needed it, or it wouldn't exist,
Right.
right?
For
The- the-
this
the-
long, no
for
less.
this long,
Yeah.
and it predates the written word, it predates religion, it predates politics, it predates
Yeah.
every modern concept that we employ in finding a shape to the world that we live in. Art precedes it, and has outlasted all of those different iterations of human society, right?
Mm,
So that to me indicates that art is something fundamental in our nature, something that's fundamental in our search for meaning, but we're making that meaning, right?
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
I think that's what art is. It's meaning making. It's meaning making.
mm-hmm.
And um, and this is also why, getting back to the first thing I said, this is partly why I always encourage people, give things that you don't understand or that you assume that you understand a second chance or a third
Give them a
chance
real
or a
chance,
fourth
yeah.
chance. Yeah, because those people are engaged in some act of meaning making and
Mm. Oh, you cut off again.
for a new set of
Yeah, there you
questions.
are.
They're not even People aren't even searching for answers necessarily. They're just searching for a new set of questions, or
Mm-hmm,
new way to frame everything, right? A new way
mm-hmm.
to like turn the perspective slightly so that we see something different. And so I think if you cut yourself off from that, you're sort of saying, well, they're not engaged in the act of meaning making. They're not engaged in this search. They're not engaged in a new set of questions, a new perspective on things. I mean, that doesn't mean everything I do has equal validity or success. I mean, the failures are part of the search.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, of
So,
course, absolutely.
so, so, so even the act of reflecting upon what I've made becomes part of the act of making it. Yeah. So, uh, yeah, that's how. I mean, I know that was a very long answer to a very seemingly simple question, but it's a really tough question to answer, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. It is absolutely a difficult question, and that's in part why I have asked so many people, and I'm planning on asking as many people just as many people as possible, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has been mentioned that asking what is art is a tired question. For example, or
Mm, mm,
it just leads to more questions,
mm,
and like, I mean, things that in my opinion rather speak to the daunting task of trying
mm.
to answer it, and they're like little cop outs in a way, in the sense of like, I'm not going to bother with that, or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Sure.
And also the what you were saying about the alleged lack of purpose of art. I've definitely heard that also, in terms of, because you said the West, and it definitely seems on par with, like, at least to some degree, like the people who came to the United States from Europe, I'm not sure where I was going with that specific detail there, but yeah, it's very. I mean, it's like the stereotype or whatever it is. It's like very like, oh, I don't know, farm and just work, and hands
Pragmatist.
and the pragmatism. And I mean, I feel like it seems like a mistake to think that art doesn't have a pragmatic purpose. It's like just because we don't know it yet, or we haven't been able to maybe point in a generalized direction of what the pragmatic purpose might be, doesn't mean that it's not there. And I mean, maybe it being present for so long, I mean, maybe not as long necessarily, because I don't remember how old is the oldest art we've found so far. I think 300,000 years.
Yeah, it's pretty old.
Is that right?
They keep changing the dates. It's not 300,000.
Right.
The archaeologists keep discovering new things, anthropologists. Right. So the dates have been shifting. As far as paintings, cave paintings, they're now like around 60,000 years ago is the estimates. Yeah. So 60 to 100,000. But I'm sure that's going to change because new discoveries will be made.
Yeah, but like what about the little Venuses?
Yeah, they're very old.
Those are older than that, no?
They are older than that. Yeah, they are older than that. So, yeah, that's the. You know, here's another way to get at this. What you were saying about the West and people, the sort of the pragmatism of our culture. You know, it really begins at the Enlightenment, right? Where the Enlightenment was the sort of it becomes there's a strain of thought that becomes very pragmatic, but also mechanistic and materialistic, right? But if you go to indigenous cultures, right, they're not thinking of the creative experience that they're engaged in as somehow separate from everything else that they do, right? It's sort of it's part of the myth of material progress that exists in our culture. That somehow we can just we can give people enough stuff to do that will fulfill their basic human needs of like shelter and food, that will be satisfying to them, which of course is proven to be false by all the pathologies that people develop when that's all they have to look forward to is how am I going to get my next meal, how am I going to pay my rent, right? And because the reality and the other thing is that and I think this is part of the reason I mentioned that is because that the way in which our culture has bifurcated those aspects of human experience, I think is extremely detrimental to the health of people. You know, that people we have this indwelt need to reflect on our experience, to shape things, to literally shape things. What humans are the tool making creature, right? And so when we separate people from some larger experience that connects them to the rest of the world and isolate them into this very mechanistic definition of what it means to be human, then we've cut them off from something very essential. Whereas when you look at if you look at indigenous cultures that haven't been affected by that philosophy, it's all integrated. Like the art, religion, spiritual practices, societal practices, your role, it's all of a piece. It's whole. That doesn't mean that doesn't. I'm not advocating any kind of like return to any particular. There's no paradise. There's no Garden of Eden. Right? I'm not suggesting that. Nor am I suggesting that we haven't made progress in some aspects of human experience of life. But what I am suggesting is that part of what's happened with art is the artist's own fault. In other words, the part of the reason that we have been like ghettoized in this way, intellectually ghettoized as a non-pragmatic, non-necessary thing, is because we've done that and we've made it. We've separated ourselves. And I mean, I don't know how we kind of steer things back.
You'll be hard pressed to find a way to do that. That actually reminds me also of this other idea that I also think was really detrimental to just all overall humanity, of separating mind from body. And I think I learned recently from some podcast that I was listening to, I think it was Descartes, that
Mm-hmm.
introduced this idea, and that would be a whole other subject of kind of like musing about the way that
Mm.
information disseminates.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the way information has disseminated just all throughout history, because it's like the Enlightenment and all this stuff. It's like there was barely any information being printed. There were not that many people that were literate, for example.
Right.
There was not that many outputs of information, so it's like
Sure.
that limits not only
Mm.
the way that information is disseminated. It like doesn't spread the way that it does now.
Right.
But
Right.
anyway, so the thing is that yeah, like that separation of mind from body, for example, it just really makes
Mm-hmm.
me think of the separation of art and whatever pragmatic purpose,
Right.
important pragmatic purpose, it has. It's like really for sure a detrimental thing, and it's like, so what I was thinking about
Mm-hmm.
earlier about how, because it's been present for so long, I mean, to me that speaks to, I mean, to me it insinuates that it has the same importance as food, shelter,
Totally. Absolutely.
reproducing somehow,
Absolutely.
and it's like,
Absolutely.
whether like it haven't been there that whole time. It
Right.
clearly it's I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
you needed to eat and you needed to make a little thing.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. Because exactly why I said the way I define art is it's meaning making.
Mm-hmm,
Right?
mm-hmm.
Now, if you could, because if I mean that's a very broad thing to say, I know, and it could be critiqued, and we could tear it apart and parse it out, and that's a whole other conversation. But um, part of the reason I use that definition is because if we can agree that that's an essential aspect of what art making is, then you can't, then it has to be essential to, how can
Yeah.
you have a species, how can you have a thinking species that isn't trying to find meaning and make meaning? Here's an analogy I would use to, and I think you said it right, and now about, we need food and shelter and all of these pragmatic things. But if I said to you, let's say, use an analogy for art. Let's say, well, one of the things that we pursue as human beings, aside from creativity, is love. Like
Mm-hmm.
we all pursue, human relations and affection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody could say, well, you don't really need that because you don't need that to survive. You
Yeah.
don't, but that's obviously not true. I mean,
Right.
it's obviously, just because it doesn't serve some sort of measurable, and empirically definable aspect of what it means to be human,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
to me also, how people say like, yeah, love is just chemicals or the whatever thing, and like to me, it's like, I don't remember what the chemicals are, but the supposed,
yeah,
to me, that's like a way of like trying to minimize the
right.
importance of something
Right.
that's actually really important.
Yeah. But even if it is chemical, that doesn't mean
It's
that it
still
doesn't
really important, yeah, for sure.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if that's true, even if that is, in terms of the precision of language, that is the causal beginning of the feeling.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's not connecting to something even deeper,
Yeah, yeah.
or that because of that, you can just shut it off like a spigot. You can't just like turn off the chemicals.
Yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah.
they're there for a reason, and we evolved with those impulses of, again, meaning making. Like I think the essentials are, like you said, that it's having meaningful work, purposeful existence. It's having human affection, having your basic physical needs met, and that's what it means to be human. So those first two things are related to the physical needs. And I think this is such a good conversation and a good thing that you're doing here. And one of the reasons I like to be on podcast, because I feel like we need to be the evangelists of this thing.
Yeah, for sure.
This is,
Absolutely.
right? We're being everybody else is preaching. The politicians
Oh,
are
yeah.
preaching at us.
Yeah.
Whatever. Everybody else is like, artists need to take this on as as part of their job, because it's no longer a given that people understand that art has a purpose in society. It's no
Yeah.
longer given, and because of that, like I think it's part of our job now we're now like we're in some ways we are like the shamans of the hunter gatherers.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was
Yes.
like, right, who are like you can imagine, imagine this, imagine the hunter gatherer tribe, and there's this one very in touch person, right? And by the way, a lot of those cave paintings, they especially the handprints, they think those are female.
Yeah, I read about that recently too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it obviously wasn't a gendered
Activity.
role, the activity, right? Yeah. Now just imagine you're in a hunter-gatherer tribe, and there's one shamanistic person who does this cave thing, and you walk and you see it, you'd be blown away. You'd be like, what is this person doing? What did they just what portal did they just, what realm did they just open up? And so in a certain way, that's what our job is to I mean, I use the word evangelize not in a religious sense, but you understand.
No, of course I understand. Because it kind of talks a little bit kind of echoes what I was saying a second ago about the dissemination of information. It's like now we not only have the written word, lots of literate people and stuff, but we have podcasts, we have the news, we have blogs, we have whatever radio shows, everything. And also I really like that idea. I mean, I not only do I like the idea because that's why I'm doing it, but I like that you said it, because it's there's so much irritatingly ugly, annoying shit out there right now. It's all the virtue signaling and all the politicizing and lying, manipulating, clickbait titles and all that stuff. And I really, I mean, I don't know, I feel emboldened with your validation now. Because a lot of people, I feel, would argue that the purpose of art is to serve as a banner for some political ideology or something, and it's really, that is beneath art. In my opinion, it's art has it has a purpose that, even if we cannot specifically name it, it's it's way beyond some subpar ideology, whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree, and because anything can be co-opted to serve a propagandistic purpose. Right. So and this is the interesting thing about art too, is that even when it's used with that particular purpose, artists can sort of embed within it something else that has a transcendent appeal to it, right? So I'll think of it in a very famous example that everybody will know is Michelangelo's David, right? Which the original civic purpose of it was an expression of some form of city-state pride and looking towards her enemies, right? That David's going to slay. Of course, Michelangelo embedded all kinds of other stuff into that. His own ideas about what beauty was, the male beauty, and his own love for male beauty, his own feelings of probably very conflicted feelings as a medieval religious person who loved all this classical art that was being dug up at the same time, and his sense of his own sexuality and sensuality, and how he didn't fit within the society, right? All this stuff is in there, right? So that when the political history that precipitated its existence, all of that dissolved, and that's what you're left with, right?
Yes.
Art. Yeah, you're left with this something that's searching much broader, his gaze is looking much broader. So yeah, I agree with you. I think I don't at the same time, I don't think that I think art has a, because we're political creatures, seemingly, it's always going to have some sort of political context, right? But I think that's just the nature of anything that you do in the world, right? But I think there's a difference between that and assuming that somehow you can utilize art, its functionality is to propagandize and to change, just to change people's minds. That's the only purpose of it. I think that when it becomes anything that's reductivist in its definition is always going to be wrong when it comes to art.
Okay. Yeah. I like. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So. You mentioned going even deeper earlier, and we don't have that much time left, but
okay.
There's another question still. So What is beauty in your opinion?
Oh boy. I think actually I've revised what I said.
Uh-huh.
That's the hardest question.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, it is really, honestly. That is the hardest question. Um, okay, boy, that is a really, 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 really hard one because um, I think in terms of the the dualities of things when I begin thinking about something like this. So in other words, people oftentimes think of beauty in terms of its opposite, right? So they'll think of what is ugly, right? But the
Mm.
reality is that it is yin and yang. There's a drop in each,
Yeah, yeah.
and the universe is not so simplistic that I could tell you what I think the definition of beauty is. I actually, I mean, this is part of I think what my search is when I'm as an artist
Mm.
is not to define beauty, but to see what the limits are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because um, because I here's the thing. I think oftentimes when people think about beauty, let's say let's take this down to a formalist thing, right? Where that deals specifically with the human form. Okay. Oftentimes, when people talk about beauty, when they talk about say humans, for example, right? Talk about human beauty.
Yeah.
Um, uh, they're not necessarily talking about the sort of Apollonian high classical Greek definition of like a search for what beauty is philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
What they're really talking about is just sexual desirability,
Uh-huh.
which
Yeah,
to
yeah.
me, which to me doesn't serve the purpose of the
Yeah.
question, right? At all, right? I mean, that's a totally different thing. And that if you go in that direction, like an evolutionary biologist will be
Yes.
be better able to answer that. And I don't think that's not where you're going. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just sort of setting that on the table and pushing it aside a little bit because I think that's oftentimes one of the things that people think of first,
Yeah.
right? I mean, look. I mean, to deny that it exists as something inherent in us, that when we recognize it, is foolish as well. I mean, you and I could see a beautiful man. We're both looking and we'd be like, yeah, he's a beautiful man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, right? We know when we look, we see. But now, having said that, that's oftentimes framed within what I just said, which is more of an evolutionary thing about what is sexually desirable for some sort of reproductive purpose,
Mm.
right? Or whatever societal structures have created a sense of beauty because of the function of it, right? It's literal functionality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as a broader question, what beauty is, I think that's a really difficult one because
Yeah.
um, how do you like? I was thinking about this recently because started doing this series of pregnant females
Mm.
that are that started with friends of mine, and I'm hoping I can expand it. I have four going right now, and I'm hoping to do a whole series. And so I was thinking about this, like it's a really like seeing a pregnant like a woman pregnant like in natural state because they're nudes as well. The pieces I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. I was thinking, wow, it's really beautiful. And then I started thinking, well, wait, what does that mean? Like, what
Mm.
do I mean by it's beautiful?
Mm.
Like, it's beautiful, like, not just the form. I mean, it's a beautiful idea. It's this concept of the universe, like pushing itself outward,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like the universe is expanding its way of expressing things, you know? Um, and and so I don't but it's also slightly terrifying, right? This mystery, right? So I think that's how I would begin thinking about beauty is, when it inspires some thought about a mystery that 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 changes your vision of the world. And it's why oftentimes beauty and terror are so closely linked.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll give you an example would be um, say a tiger, right? Like if you see a tiger, that's a beautiful creature.
Mm-hmm.
It's also terrifying,
Yeah.
right? So because and so we so that's why I find the question the answering the question of what is beauty is so difficult because oftentimes it leads me down pathways that I suddenly realize, oh wait, that's not what I thought beauty was,
Mm.
right? And uh, so so I think I haven't heard enough. I haven't listened through other people's answers to this. I actually
Mhm.
specifically tried not to because I wanted to, I didn't want
Contaminate
to be
what you might say.
influenced by
Yeah.
what anybody else said. Yeah, I didn't want to contaminate my own thoughts. Uh, but I think about this question a lot.
Mm.
And I think here's the other thing. I think one of the things that makes art unique is that it has a sort of redemptive ability. So I'm thinking of, so you could take something that's apparently ugly, and I don't mean like visually ugly necessarily. Like it's just like very disturbing, say for example, and by art can transform it into something that has an aesthetic appeal,
Mhm.
which then suddenly like twists the knife in a little bit. Like I'll give you an example. Think of like whenever I go to Rome every year, and I have students there, and I take them to look at artwork. And one of the things I always take them to see is, or not always, but oftentimes take them to see is Caravaggio's Judith and Holofernes, right? And also the Artemisia Gentileschi version as
Mm.
well in Palazzo Barberini. And like it's a beautiful painting, but she's cutting off his head,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like,
And it has like gushing
and if you
blood,
know,
right?
yeah,
Gentileschi's,
yeah. And if you
yeah.
know the whole story, right? And if you know the whole story, it's not just her violence, but she's reacting to his violence, right?
Mm.
That's like it's like she was yeah. So or think of Cellini's Perseus or the Goya's, the etchings, depicting, the violence of human beings, or Guernica, right? Think of Guernica. It's a depiction of violence and destruction,
Mm.
right? But it also fits within our aesthetic definition of something being beautiful.
Mhm.
And so that's that's why I think it's maybe an impossible thing to define, because the world is not so easily separated that way, right? And it's what makes it it's what makes humans so, we can, I mean, look what's happening in the world right now. We can be such beautiful creatures and such ugly creatures, the things
Mm.
that we do to each other and to the world, and yet, we're like little lower than angels, quote, so to speak. It's I have a hard time pulling that apart.
Mm.
I have a really difficult time with that because, in fact, one of the things that I was doing a lot in my work for several years, and particularly with the female figures, was asking that question, like, why do people want to look at certain things,
Mhm.
and can I make things that then, like, make the act of looking reflect back on the person, right? So because we're clearly have an aesthetic bent to us,
Mm.
right? As a species, but why? And
Mm.
I actually don't think, I don't have an answer for that. Like,
Mm.
what is beauty? I gave you like a very rambling answer, but it's partly because I don't, I'm still searching myself.
Yeah.
In fact, I like the idea that I could take something that's traditionally, like, this is kind of one of the directions I want to go in with my work, right? That doesn't fit whatever standards the society has for beauty, and but making it beautiful because as an artist, I see the beauty and then I transform it, right?
Mhm.
Right. And I'm not saying that like a violence is beautiful. I'm not, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't want people to confuse what I'm saying there. What I'm saying is that it oftentimes, what we consider beautiful, like, it like lays right up against the things that we also consider like distasteful,
Mhm.
and repulsive even, and that's look, you can depict, an a naked old man who's like lost all of his, like, sexual appeal, and make it beautiful, right? That's
Yeah.
that Yeah, exactly. And I think that is what, maybe again, going maybe back to the other definition of art, that's part of the search for meaning. That's part of the journey, is, saying, well, how much of this idea that we have of beauty is societally imposed, how much of it is biologically imposed, from our evolution. And that we, I remember being a child, and I would see a magazine cover of a beautiful woman. I just stare at it. I don't know why I did that. I have no idea why. I don't.
Yeah. I definitely agree, and I'm glad that you brought that up about the allegedly societally imposed beauty standards, because it's my opinion, or at least I've come to kind of realize through the conversations, that is a gross oversimplification. And it really kind of accentuates something that's also by nature, that we tend to take the path of least resistance, because that's what our body does, that's what nature does, that's what we just do it by default.
That's true.
And it's really an oversimplification. And I started reading a book by Dennis Dutton called The Art Instinct, at the suggestion of other at the suggestion of a couple of other guests I had on the podcast. And it talks effectively about the biological underpinnings of the reasons for which we consider certain things either attractive or beautiful. Right. And it's effectively an individual, because the oversimplification of the idea of beauty in the physical sense is that if a person has a list of physical characteristics, that immediately makes them beautiful. And that is obviously inaccurate.
Right,
okay.
Of course.
Because you have the classic, blondes, blue eyes and stuff, that's a classic that I remember at least hearing when I was younger, and it's obvious that there's plenty of really repulsive blonde, blue-eyed people, so it's obviously checking a list of certain physical characteristics is not what makes somebody beautiful. It's really something more than that. And the physical characteristics that we consider to this day beautiful, whether or attractive at the very least, have biological underpinnings as well, because it's they have I don't remember whether it's fertility or reproductive fitness, that kind of those are the reasons we find things generally attractive. But okay. I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Sorry.
No, it's just that I don't want to invade your time.
No, it's fine. It's totally okay. I'm free, so I've set aside quite a bit of time here.
Okay.
I like what you said there too, because it's you can't be reductivist either way. People who say, but in a certain sense, here's again, it's these dichotomies are not dichotomies; they're intertwined. So even something that is culturally or societally imposed came from a biological imperative.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't excuse its existence. Right. That doesn't excuse, because we're thinking creatures, and we're actually actively and intellectually involved in our evolution. Right. That doesn't excuse when we take things in the wrong direction. But it is the answer in all of those mysteries about why we do what we do has to have some sort of evolutionary underpinning, right? Otherwise, otherwise we become sort of Neoplatonic in our definition of things, which I think is also highly reductive, right? So I think either of those extremes is probably not going to serve us well in our search for understanding who we are. Let's think of something that's not about physical beauty, but just behavior, ugly behavior versus beautiful behavior, right? I've taken to, whenever I look at these things in the world, and I see them in myself, or I see them in other people that not necessarily in myself, right? Let's say violence, for example, right? I've never been violent, and I've never had the impulse to be, but I recognize that when I see other people doing that I'm them, I'm human. And so or when I see people praising certain things, certain other behaviors, and I don't do those things, I think, well, I'm them too. So I always, my way of framing it now when I see these things, I don't ask, why am I this way? I just say, I think, why are we like this? Why are we like this? Why are we why do we have this rapaciousness, right? And as a species, where we have to gather, and like we have to hoard, and we have to, it's like Marx called primitive accumulation. This idea that we have to take all the resources for ourselves, and that's like an ugly thing, right? That to me, like, I would define that as an ugly characteristic of
Mm.
human. But at the same time, we're incredibly generous.
Yep.
So these poles are really confusing to me. But this is what it means to be human, is
Yeah.
to have these questions, and this is why we make art,
Yeah.
because we're trying to find the purpose in all of that. We're trying to find the purpose in those poles that are pulling us in different directions. And um and so so but but yes, I think it's way too reductivist to say that beauty is a societally imposed idea, or to say it's purely biological, and that we haven't
Mm.
then reflected upon that biological impulse and steered it, right? Neither one of those extremes is true. They're both true.
Mm.
They're both true. And that's why it's confusing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, one of the many reasons why it's confusing. But it is a fascinating question, and I would love to hear what other people say about it, because I don't have the I don't presume they have the answer to anything. I'm an agnostic, so whatever I say, I'm okay with people saying, "No, you're wrong," because these are big open-ended questions, and I like to feel like we're part of a collective endeavor, right?
Yeah.
That's and if I can plant a little seed of something, I feel like I did it okay. I did a good enough job there.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you for sure. All right. Well, we have hit the 1 hour mark, uh, good sir. So
Yeah.
I really like what you said just now, and I think that's a good place to cut off the episode. So
Mhm.
Brian, please tell our viewers and listeners what you're up to lately, and where your work can be found, and like these classes in Rome. Because you said in a couple of weeks you have one. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I have a lot going on. Currently I have one of my life-size sculptures in an exhibition in a museum in Lyon, which is then going to be going to Paris in September. Hopefully, I'll be able to get there for the opening of that exhibition. It's a group exhibition. A lot of great artists in that show. It's like I'm very honored to be included in that. Thanks to my gallery and the curators of the exhibition. So that's happening right now. I don't have a specific exhibition of my own planned yet, but I'm hoping to do so. I mean, it feels like the gallery world has been slow to like get back into gear, at least in my experience with
Mm.
post COVID. But I am working on a whole new series of pieces, and
With the
they want
pregnant
to.
ladies, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Okay.
more. Actually, I have a whole I'm doing some big male, female figure groups, the pregnant lady. I have a whole bunch of stuff going on. So people want
That's
to
awesome.
follow that. They can just go to my Instagram,
Yep.
just my name, Brian with Craig Sculptor. So that's happening, and then the courses that I'm teaching, I every year go to Rome and have other artists join me. I have some painters joining me, another sculptor joining me. This year will be in Rome all of May. And typically I do that series of courses in May. Let's see what else. I'll be traveling to Australia in mid-September to
To the
do.
down under, is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Like in the funny
yeah,
way? The down
yeah,
under?
the down under, yeah. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to go down there and teach one course, and then hang out with some sculptor friends, do some sculpting down there. Those are the those that's the next 6 months for me. Pretty busy.
That's awesome. A good, busy, productive 6 months. That's
Yeah,
inspiring.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian, for joining me. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you
You're
for your
welcome.
words and for your thoughts. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Feel free to let Brian and I know what you think of this conversation in the comment section. I also invite you to subscribe to my audiovisual channel, because more of these conversations are coming. I also invite you to like this video and share it with any and all pertinent individuals. If you want to support Brian, myself, this podcast, or all three, all the corresponding links will be in the video description. And thank you again for everyone's attention, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.